You're trespassing on our community, hillbilly.
She screamed it through her own teeth, blonde ponytail whipping as her crew swung sledgehammers into my grandfather's hand-carved cedar gate. Splinters of wood, my grandpa Wesley shaped himself in 1962, flew across the pasture like he'd never existed. Brittany Halloway stood there in her HOA polo, smirking, while 3 contractors smashed through a man's legacy on a clear Tuesday morning. I'd inherited 1,500 acres of Texas hill country 2 weeks earlier. I'd driven out to fix a well pump for my daughter. Instead, I watched a stranger demolish my property and order me off my own land. She had no idea who I was. She had no idea what sat inside my grandfather's safe. And she had absolutely no idea that her entire neighborhood, every house, every driveway, every koi pond, was about to belong to me. What would you do if a Karen bulldozed your inheritance? Tell me below. And where are you watching from tonight? 2 weeks before that morning, I sat in a San Antonio probate office, signing papers I'd dreaded for a decade. My name is Caleb Whitaker. I'm 36, a licensed land surveyor, and the only thing I ever really wanted from my grandfather was more time with him. Grandpa Wesley died on a Sunday while feeding a stray heifer near the lower creek. The doctor said his heart simply quit. Quiet, painless, the way good men hope to go. He was 89. He'd worked the same 1,500 acres of hill country bluestem since 1958. He raised my mother on that land. He taught me to drive a tractor when I was 9. And he was the last person who really knew my wife, Anna, before cancer took her 2 winters ago. I came home from the funeral with a daughter, Maddie, 6 years old, hair the color of late summer wheat, and a deed to a ranch I didn't know how to run. The lawyer slid a brown envelope across the desk and told me Grandpa had left specific instructions. "Don't sell," the note inside read in his blocky handwriting. "Read every paper in the safe before you decide anything." I tucked that envelope behind the passenger seat of my F250 and didn't open it for 2 weeks. Grief makes a man busy in strange ways. I helped Maddie with her science fair project on monarch butterflies. I fixed our water heater myself. I avoided the ranch like it might ask me to be someone I wasn't yet. But the back taxes wouldn't wait, so I drove out on a clear October Tuesday morning. The road had changed since my last visit. Where Grandpa's old gravel cut-through used to run, somebody had paved a smooth black ribbon and slapped up a fake stone gate that read, Cedar Bluff Estates, a private community. I remembered the subdivision being built when I was a teenager. Grandpa had leased a corner of his land to a developer. 240 homes, nice ones, with stacked stone facades and 3-car garages, and koi ponds and lawns mowed within a half-inch tolerance. I'd never thought twice about it. I drove through the gate slow, nodding to the kid in the guard shack. He waved me past without checking. Grandpa's old truck was a familiar shape out here, even after 20 years. The air smelled like diesel and cedar, and that sweet rotting hay smell that means October in Texas. I followed the access road around the western edge of the subdivision toward Grandpa's cabin, the gravel popping under my tires like cereal and milk. That's when she pulled up behind me in a white Tahoe with magnetic HOA decals slapped on the doors. She honked twice. I rolled to a stop near the cattle guard, figuring she needed help. A woman climbed out, mid-40s, blonde ponytail pulled tight enough to lift her eyebrows, an HOA polo embroidered over her chest, and that practiced expression of someone who decided you'd lose this conversation before you opened your mouth. "This road is restricted to Cedar Bluff residents," she announced. "No hello. I don't recognize your vehicle." I leaned out the window. "Morning, ma'am. Just heading to the back of the property. Cabin's behind that ridge." She squinted at the truck, at my work boots, at Maddie's purple booster seat in the back. Her lip curled. "There's no cabin back there, sweetheart. That's HOA common land. Whoever told you otherwise lied to you." I almost laughed. Almost. Instead, I tipped my hat, told her I'd take it up with her board, and drove on. She followed me for half a mile, snapping pictures of my license plate. I made a mental note. I made a lot of mental notes that morning. That was Brittany Halloway, president of the Cedar Bluff Estates Homeowners Association. And before the sun set on her little Tuesday, she was going to teach me everything a man needs to know about petty volunteer power. I rumbled the rest of the way to the cabin, kicking up a tail of dust visible from the moon. The cabin sat about a quarter-mile past the western edge of Cedar Bluff Estates, tucked behind a low ridge of live oaks. Grandpa had built it in 1960, long before any developer ever showed up. Out of cedar he'd cut himself. The roof needed work. The well pump needed a new pressure switch. I'd brought tools for both. I parked, climbed out, and that's when I heard it. The whine of a diesel engine on the other side of the ridge. Then the thunk, thunk, thunk of something heavy striking wood. I jogged up the slope. What I saw at the top stopped me cold. Brittany Holloway. 3 men in fluorescent vests, a small bobcat skid steer, and what used to be my grandfather's hand-carved memorial gate, now reduced to splinters and broken hinges in the grass. The gate had stood at the property line since 1962. Grandpa had carved a longhorn skull into the crossbeam, his own design, his own knife work, to honor his older brother who died in Korea. It was the most personal thing on the ranch. "What in the hell are you doing?" I asked, voice level. Brittany turned with a clipboard and that same smirk. "Emergency aesthetic violation. The board voted last night. That gate's on private property, my property. It's adjacent to HOA managed common space. We had a quorum. We had a contractor. We had every right." She tapped the clipboard. "You're trespassing on our community, hillbilly." The crew kept swinging. One of them, a young guy who looked uncomfortable, caught my eye and looked away. The Bobcat operator stopped at least, engine idling. I pulled out my phone and started recording. Wide shot. Close up on Brittany's badge. Close up on the contractor's truck door, Hollis & Sons demolition. Close up on the splintered wood with the longhorn skull still visible on a broken plank. Brittany frowned. "You can't film me. Public access road, Texas, one-party consent. I can." She stepped toward me. Then a sheriff's deputy cruiser rolled up the gravel. Brittany lit up like a Christmas tree. "Officer, this man is harassing my contractors." The deputy, name tag said Reyes, mid-50s, the kind of face that's seen every kind of nonsense, climbed out slow. He looked at the splintered gate, looked at me, looked at Brittany. "Ma'am, who called this in?" "I did. I'm the HOA president." "And who's this gentleman?" "He's a trespasser." I held out my driver's license. "Caleb Whitaker. I own this land. I have the deed in the truck." Reyes looked at the license, looked at the cabin behind us, looked at the longhorn skull plank in the grass. "Ma'am, you authorized this demolition?" "It was a board decision." "On private land?" She faltered for 1/2 second. "It's a property line dispute. We can handle it civilly." Reyes sighed the long sigh of a man 6 months from retirement. "Y'all are going to handle this through the county recorder and the courts, not with a bobcat. Mr. Whitaker, you want to press charges for destruction of property?" I thought about Maddie at home drawing butterflies. I thought about Grandpa's note. "Read every paper in the safe before you decide anything." "Not today," I said. "I'll handle this through proper channels, but I want it on record." Reyes wrote me a case number. Brittany rolled her eyes hard enough to risk a sprain. "You'll thank me later, sweetheart. That gate was an eyesore." I crouched, picked up the splintered plank with the longhorn carving, and tucked it under my arm. "Ma'am," I said, calm as a creek in August, "you just made a very expensive mistake." She laughed, actually laughed. "You can't sue an HOA, hun. We have an indemnification clause. We have a legal fund. We have insurance. You'll spend $20,000 on lawyers and get a $100 gate replacement check." I tipped my hat, got back in the truck, drove the long way around to the cabin, sat on the porch with that splintered plank across my knees, and Grandpa's longhorn skull staring up at me. I didn't open the brown envelope yet. I wanted to be calm when I did. By Wednesday morning, Brittany Holloway had decided to make me a project. I'd come back to the cabin at first light to finish the well pump. Maddie was at her aunt's place in San Antonio for the week, which freed me up to work straight through. I expected silence. I got a notice nailed to my front door instead. Notice of unauthorized occupation, issued by Cedar Bluff Estates HOA. Property listed as common area parcel CB-17. Vacate within 72 hours or face fines of $200 per day. The paper was still warm from the printer. Someone had walked up to my cabin in the dark and hammered a tack into my front door. I pulled the notice off and put it in a manila folder labeled Evidence. Then I checked the well. The well wouldn't prime. I pulled the access cover and found a fresh padlock on the pump house door. Not mine. A handwritten sign read, "Property of Cedar Bluff Estates. Do not tamper." The lock was a cheap brass thing you can buy at any hardware store. I cut it with my bolt cutters in 11 seconds. Inside, someone had disconnected the pressure switch and run a hand-lettered note across the housing. HOA, Aquifer Protection, Illegal Extraction. The well had been on Whitaker land since 1947. It tapped a private aquifer my grandfather paid to have permitted in his name. I had the paperwork in the cabin file cabinet. I reconnected the pressure switch, took photos of everything, filed a police report by phone with Deputy Reyes, who sighed even harder than yesterday. By noon, 3 pickup trucks I didn't recognize were idling on the access road, taking pictures of my cabin. By 2 o'clock, an HOA Neighborhood Watch SUV was parked at my driveway entrance. By 4, someone had spray-painted "Go Home" on the cabin's back wall in pink letters that looked suspiciously like Brittany's clipboard handwriting. I called my friend Hector, a retired Bexar County deputy I'd known since high school. Hector showed up with 2 large dogs and a thermos of coffee. "You're being squeezed," he said, scanning the road through binoculars. "Classic Karen siege. They want you to lose your temper. They want a restraining order on file. Then they want to claim the land in adverse possession. Adverse possession requires open and notorious use for 10 years in Texas," I said. He grinned. "Look at you, surveyor. Yeah, they'd never make the timeline, but they don't know that. They think if they make life impossible, you'll sell and run." I poured a cup of his coffee. It tasted like burnt motor oil and was perfect. How do I make her overreach? You don't. You let her overreach herself. People like that always do. That night I sat on the porch with the brown envelope on my knee. Grandpa's note kept circling. Read every paper in the safe before you decide anything. The safe was in the back bedroom. Cast iron. Combination my grandfather had me memorize when I was 12. I didn't open it yet. I wanted to see how far Brittany would push first. She was painting a picture, and I wanted the whole canvas. By Thursday, Brittany had filed a formal nuisance complaint with the county. By Friday, she'd convinced the local water authority to investigate my unpermitted extraction. By Saturday, a small story ran in the Blue Stem Beacon under the headline, "Ranch Newcomer Stirs HO a Dispute." A story Brittany had clearly fed the reporter herself, complete with a photo of the demolished gate captioned, "Safety Hazard, Removed by Community." Maddie came back Sunday afternoon. She climbed out of my sister's Honda, holding a stuffed monarch butterfly, and asked me where the gate went. "Some lady knocked it down," I said. "Why?" "Because she thinks she's in charge." "Is she in charge?" I knelt and looked her in the eye, her mother's eyes. Exactly. "No, sweetheart, she just hasn't been told yet." Maddie nodded, like that made perfect sense. 6-year-olds understand power better than most adults give them credit for. I tucked her in at 9. I poured a glass of Grandpa's bourbon at 9:30. But I wasn't ready for the safe yet. Brittany had one more move in her. I wanted to see it before I made mine. The Cedar Bluff Estates community meeting happened Monday night in the clubhouse, a stucco building with a wedding cake ceiling and a coffee bar that brewed Folgers. Brittany had emailed every resident a flyer titled, "Urgent, Protecting Our Community from Hostile Intrusion." I knew about it because Hector's wife's cousin lived on Magnolia Court and forwarded it to him. I drove over at 6:45, wore clean jeans, a button-up, and the same boots that had walked Grandpa's pasture for 20 years. I sat in the back row. Maddie was at Hector's house, eating chicken nuggets and watching cartoons. The clubhouse was packed, maybe 120 residents, plus Brittany at the podium in a teal blazer, plus 3 of her bored cronies in matching teal lapel pins. She'd hung an enlarged photo of my cabin on a tripod beside her, with a red circle drawn around it like a target. "This man," she announced, pointing at the photo, "has been illegally occupying common land for over 2 weeks. He has refused to comply with our notices. He has threatened our contractors. He has tapped our aquifer. And tonight, we are going to vote on a board resolution to formally annex the unused acreage west of the subdivision. and pursue legal action to remove him. A few people clapped. Most just looked confused. A woman in row 3 raised her hand. "Brittany, has anyone actually shown the deed for that land? Doesn't somebody own it?" Brittany's smile tightened. The records show the parcel was reverted to common use after the original landowner died. We've been managing it ever since. The board has full authority. Lie. Bald-faced lie. But the residents didn't know that. I stood up, slow, calm. "Excuse me, I'd like to introduce myself." Every head turned. Brittany's smile froze. "My name is Caleb Whitaker. My grandfather, Wesley Whitaker, owned this ranch. He died last month. I inherited it. I have the deed in my truck if anyone wants to see it. The cabin behind the ridge isn't on common land. It's on my land. The pasture isn't unused. It's mine. The well isn't tapping an HOA aquifer. The aquifer is permitted to my family. It's been permitted to my family since 1947. The room got very quiet. Brittany recovered fast. "Officer, please remove this gentleman. He's not a resident. He's not authorized to speak." A sheriff's deputy I didn't recognize stepped forward from the wall. Young, nervous, eyes darting. "Sir, the HOA has the right to set meeting rules. I'm going to have to ask you to leave." I didn't argue. I knew that fight wasn't worth winning publicly. I held up both hands. "Folks, before I go, I'd ask one favor. If anybody here has been to a board meeting where my grandfather's name was mentioned, or where any original lease was discussed, please find me afterward. My number's on the door." I dropped a stack of business cards on the back table and walked out. Behind me, I heard Brittany clear her throat. As I was saying, the vote on Resolution 2026-04 will commence shortly. The motion is to annex the disputed parcel and begin offering 10 new build lots starting at $495,000. The door closed behind me before I could hear the rest. Outside in the parking lot, a man in his 60s caught up to me. Khaki pants, leather jacket, gray mustache. He stuck out his hand. "Frank Delaney. Lived in Cedar Bluff since 2001. I knew your grandfather a little. Brittany's been pulling stuff like this for years. The annexation thing is new, though. That land vote tonight. She's planning to sell lots she doesn't own." He paused. "I served on the board in 2018. There's no documentation about a lease or any reversion. She's making it up." I gave him my card. "Frank, would you be willing to say that under oath?" He nodded once, hard. "Son, you have no idea how much I'd enjoy that." I drove home through the dark, past the broken cedar gate, past the cabin, past Maddie's empty booster seat. I parked, walked inside, poured a glass of Grandpa's bourbon, sat down in front of the cast iron safe. It was time to read the papers. The safe smelled like old paper and gun oil. Inside were 3 things: a sealed manila envelope marked Lease, Do Not Lose, a thick stack of property records bound by a rubber band, and a small spiral notebook in Grandpa's handwriting titled Cedar Bluff Lease, Important Notes. I opened the notebook first. The first page was dated March 1962. Grandpa had written in pencil, the lines slanting slightly, the way old people's handwriting does. The notes were sparse but clear. Lease 95 acres, western parcel to Holloway Briggs Development. Term 50 years. Renewable in writing only. Reversion clause. All improvements not removed within 6 months of expiration become property of Whitaker Estate. Annual fee $1. Paid in full for 50 years up front, $50. Filed at Bluestem County Recorder, March 14, 1962. I read that paragraph 3 times. Holloway Briggs Development. Holloway. Holloway. I turned the page. Grandpa had been meticulous. He'd written 1 note every year, like a man checking on a slow neighbor. 1972. 23 homes built. Lease in good standing. 1985. 80 homes. Holloway Briggs sold to Cedar Bluff Estates, HOA. Notified them of lease terms by certified mail. Receipt attached. 1995. 180 homes. Quiet community. 2010. 240 homes. 2 years to lease expiration. Sent reminder letter. 2012. Lease expired March 14th. Renewal letter never returned. No payment received. No request for extension. Decision: do not pursue immediately. Let neighbors enjoy their homes. We'll revisit before death. The last entry was dated September of this year, 2 weeks before he died. Caleb, when you read this, the lease has been expired for 14 years. The HOA has been collecting dues on land they no longer have any right to occupy. The reversion clause is still enforceable under Texas property code and common law. They owe back rent, and they owe more than that. I left them alone because they were good neighbors for a long time. But if any of them ever harm you or this land, hand this notebook to a Texas property attorney, and the whole thing falls into your hands. The community is yours, son. So is what you decide to do with it. I sat back. I think I stopped breathing for 30 seconds. The manila envelope held the original 1962 lease, notarized, county stamped, signed by my grandfather and a man named Reginald Halloway. Brittany's father-in-law, I'd find out a week later. The reversion clause was on page 4, paragraph 11, underlined twice. Upon expiration of this lease without renewal in writing, all permanent and semi-permanent improvements erected on the leased premises shall revert to and become the property of the Whitaker estate, including but not limited to dwellings, outbuildings, paving, utility installations, and ornamental features. Every house, every driveway, every koi pond. 240 homes, roughly $180 million in residential real estate, plus 14 years of HOA dues collected on land that wasn't legally Brittany's to manage, approximately $12 million by my back-of-the-napkin math. I poured another inch of bourbon. I didn't drink it, I just looked at it. Then I called Marisol Vega, the best property attorney in San Antonio, recommended by Hector, and left a voicemail at 11:37 at night. Miss Vega, my name is Caleb Whitaker. My grandfather left me 1,500 acres in Blue Stem County. The entire Cedar Bluff Estate subdivision is sitting on it. The lease expired 14 years ago. They've been collecting dues. I have all the documentation. I'd like to retain you tomorrow. I hung up. I sat on the cabin porch in the cold October air, smelling cedar smoke and wet grass, and the kind of justice that takes its time. Then I drank the bourbon. Marisol Vega called me back at 6:45 the next morning. By 8, she'd cleared her schedule. By 10, I was sitting in her downtown San Antonio office, a small room with floor-to-ceiling law books and a poster of a Texas mockingbird on the wall. Marisol was about 50, silver-streaked black hair, half glasses on a beaded chain, voice like a country radio host. She read Grandpa's notebook in silence for 20 minutes. Then she set it down, folded her hands, and smiled like a coyote at sunrise. Mr. Whitaker, this is the cleanest case I have seen in 26 years of practice. You have what we call an undisputed paper trail. Now, how spicy do you want to make this? What are the options? She held up 3 fingers. Option 1, quiet title action. We file in district court, prove the lease lapsed, prove the reversion clause is valid, and obtain a judgment that you own all the improvements. Roughly 9 months, probably uncontested if their lawyers are honest. Option 2, quiet title plus damages. We claim 14 years of unpaid lease at fair market value, plus disgorgement of all HOA dues collected on land you legally owned. That's potentially $12 to $20 million from the HOA's reserve accounts and insurance carriers. Takes longer, 12 to 18 months. Option 3? She smiled bigger. Option 3 is my favorite. Quiet title, damages, and we offer the residents a settlement. A fair, perpetual, recordable ground lease at market rate. They keep their homes, you keep the land. The HOA, and specifically your friend Brittany, gets exposed as having operated without legal authority for over a decade. The residents will be grateful to you and furious at her. We turn the entire neighborhood against the antagonist. Option 3, I said. Excellent choice. She put me through a crash course in Texas property law that morning. The basics. In Texas, a lease must be renewed in writing if the contract requires it. Silence is not consent. Quiet title actions go to district court, not justice of the peace. Reversion clauses in long-term land leases are enforceable under common law as long as they're unambiguous. Mineral rights, surface rights, and easements are separate property interests that can be reserved, sold, or restored. And this was the part that made me laugh out loud. Texas allows recovery of attorney's fees in property disputes when the prevailing party can show the other side acted in bad faith. Marisol explained it all in one-sentence takeaways. If they paved it, you own it. If they didn't renew, they don't have it. If they collected money on land they didn't lease, that money is yours. She filed the quiet title action that afternoon. She filed a formal notice of lease expiration with the HOA's registered agent, copy to every board member. She filed a records request with Bluestem County Recorder, retrieving every document Brittany had ever signed in her HOA capacity. And she made one quiet phone call to a friend at the Texas Attorney General's Consumer Protection Division, asking them to take a look at HOA dues collection practices. While Marisol worked the legal angles, I worked the ground. I drove out to the ranch the next 4 days running. I walked the entire western parcel with a high-precision GPS unit and resurveyed the boundary myself. The original 1962 survey had a margin of error of about 3 feet, and I wanted modern numbers. I documented every house, driveway, utility line, and permanent improvement inside my boundary. I took 847 photographs. I logged every well, every septic system, every irrigation valve. I also met Frank Delaney for coffee. Frank brought 2 other former board members, a retired engineer named Dale and a quilt shop owner named Estelle. All 3 signed sworn affidavits stating that Brittany had never disclosed any lease, any expiration, any reversion clause to the membership during her 6 years as president. Estelle handed me a paper bag full of HOA newsletters, in which Brittany referred to the parcel as our common land and our reserve acreage. Marisol called that bag the smoking newsletter. I called the local NBC affiliate's investigative reporter, a young woman named Priya Anand, and gave her a 30-minute briefing off the record. She said she'd start sniffing. I asked her to wait 2 weeks before publishing. She agreed. I drove home through a soft October dusk, the blue stem grass turning bronze in the slanting light, and I felt, for the first time in 2 years, like Anna was watching me get something exactly right. Brittany Halloway responded to my quiet title filing the way a raccoon responds to a closing trap. She got louder, meaner, and dumber. Within 48 hours of being served, she'd called an emergency board meeting and authorized $75,000 from the HOA reserve to hire a high-priced defense firm out of Houston, Carruthers and Boyd, the kind of law firm whose website features stock photos of skylines and the word aggressive in 8 different fonts. She also hired a private investigator named Lonnie Dukes, a 40-something former bondsman with a mustache that looked drawn on by his wife. Lonnie spent 2 days parked outside my San Antonio apartment in a beige Crown Vic, eating sunflower seeds and pretending he was invisible. I waved at him on day 3. He drove away that afternoon and never came back. Hector said Lonnie was the bottom of the barrel for Texas PIs, and Brittany clearly didn't know the difference. But Brittany's real talent was for smear. By the following Monday, every Cedar Bluff resident had a flyer in their mailbox titled, "Who is Caleb Whitaker?" It featured a 5-year-old mugshot of a Caleb Whitaker from Tulsa who'd been arrested for assault. Different person, different spelling, different state. Brittany hadn't even bothered to check. Marisol photographed the flyer, attached it to a defamation claim, and added it to the case file with the gentle satisfaction of a woman shelving a particularly good wine. Brittany followed the flyer with a Facebook post in the Cedar Bluff residents group, claiming I was a known squatter with a criminal history attempting to extort our community. 211 people liked it, 43 commented. Then Frank Delaney commented with one line. "That's not him. That's a different person from Oklahoma. Brittany, you need to stop this." The thread exploded. Brittany deleted Frank's comment. Frank screenshotted it first and forwarded it to Marisol. The screenshot went straight into the file. That same week, Brittany filed an emergency motion in district court, asking the judge to issue a temporary restraining order against me, claiming I was threatening community safety by parking near homes. She submitted 3 photos as evidence. All 3 showed my truck parked on my own property line. The judge denied the motion in writing within 4 hours, and noted, with judicial dryness, that Plaintiff appears to be confused about property boundaries. She tried to weaponize the county next. She filed 11 separate code enforcement complaints against my cabin in one afternoon. Structural, electrical, septic, well, fence, weeds, livestock, signage, lighting, paint, and noise. The county sent a single inspector out. He walked the cabin for 40 minutes, drank coffee with me on the porch, found exactly one issue, a frayed wire on the porch light, and gave me 30 days to replace it. I replaced it that afternoon and emailed him the photo. He emailed back, "Mr. Whitaker, please tell Mrs. Holloway to stop calling our office." Meanwhile, Brittany was bleeding money, reserve account down to $40,000. 2 board members resigned over the spending. A third, a retired pediatric nurse named Margie, quietly called Marisol's office and asked if her personal liability as a board member was at risk. Marisol's exact answer, according to her assistant, was, "Ma'am, if you cooperate with us, we'll keep you out of it. If you don't, you'll find out the hard way." Margie signed an affidavit that afternoon. I kept my head down. I worked. I fixed the cabin roof. I planted 4 pecan saplings near Grandpa's gravesite on the eastern ridge. I read Maddie bedtime stories. I let Brittany burn through her own reserves while my case grew quieter and stronger. The destructive Karen pattern repeats itself in every state, in every county, in every HOA in America. When a person without real authority loses control, they double down on theater. They mistake noise for power. They mistake spending for strategy. They mistake their own anger for righteousness. If you ever find yourself in a fight with someone like Brittany, the takeaway is simple. Document everything, hire a real lawyer, and let her dig her own hole as deep as she's willing to dig. The week she filed her 16th complaint, Marisol mailed Brittany a single envelope. Inside was 1 page, a transcript of every fraudulent statement Brittany had made on the Cedar Bluff Estates Facebook page, with timestamps, page numbers, and a citation to Texas Civil Practice and Remedies Code section 73.001. The package was Marisol's way of telling Brittany, "We are coming." Brittany's way of responding was to escalate again. Brittany Holloway's last bad week started with a chainsaw and ended with a court summons. On a Tuesday morning at 4:15, 3 hours before sunrise, a Cedar Bluff Estates landscaping crew rolled onto my access road in a flatbed truck. By 5:30, they'd cut down 2 of the 4 pecan saplings I'd planted near Grandpa's gravesite. By 6, they'd capped the wellhead with poured concrete. By 6:30, they'd left a hand-painted sign at the property line that read, "Dangerous well, do not approach." I found it all at 7:40 when I drove out to feed the cattle. I didn't yell. I didn't kick anything. I called Marisol. Marisol called the Bluestem County Sheriff. 2 deputies arrived in 25 minutes. Neither of them the nervous young guy from the community meeting. The older one, Sergeant Crane, walked the scene with me. He photographed the concrete cap. He photographed the cut sapling stumps. He photographed the sign in Brittany's handwriting. "Felony criminal mischief," he said, low and flat, plus aggravated property destruction, plus interfering with a permitted well. "Mr. Whitaker, I want you to know, this case is going to a grand jury, whether you press charges or not. The DA hates HOA stuff." I almost smiled. That afternoon, Brittany held an impromptu press conference in front of the Cedar Bluff clubhouse. She'd called the local Fox affiliate, hoping to control the story before the NBC reporter Priya Anand published her piece. She stood on the clubhouse steps in a coral blazer and told the camera that Caleb Whitaker was an outside agitator trying to seize property that rightfully belonged to the community, and that her board had been forced to take protective action against an environmental hazard. The Fox reporter, a polite young man named Kyle, asked her one follow-up. "Ma'am, can you provide the lease or deed that establishes the HOA's ownership of the disputed parcel?" Brittany's smile thinned. "We're not going to discuss legal details on camera." Kyle thanked her, turned to his cameraman, and ended the segment. Marisol watched the broadcast that night and laughed for 40 straight seconds. The next morning, Priya Anand's piece dropped on NBC, 5 minutes long. Aerial drone footage of the subdivision overlaid with the boundaries of the Whitaker Ranch. A clear, simple graphic showing the 1962 lease, the 2012 expiration, the reversion clause, an interview with Frank Delaney, who looked like a man finally allowed to tell the truth. An interview with Margie, the pediatric nurse, who said on camera, "I've been on this board for 4 years. I had no idea any of this was real." Brittany was offered an interview. She declined. The story went viral in Texas property circles that week. The Blue Stem Beacon ran a front-page follow-up titled, "HOA operating on land it didn't own. Residents demand answers." The Texas Attorney General's office announced an inquiry into Cedar Bluff Estate's dues collection practices. A class action plaintiffs firm in Austin sent letters to the HOA asking for membership lists. Brittany doubled down. She emailed all residents claiming the news story was fake. She tried to call an emergency vote to remove herself from any potential personal liability by passing a special board resolution. Margie blocked the vote by resigning publicly on the spot. 2 other board members joined Margie within the hour. By Saturday, Cedar Bluff Estates had no functioning board except Brittany and one loyal friend, a man named Trent, who sold timeshares. While Brittany flailed, I prepared. Marisol and I built the public climax piece by piece. We coordinated with the Blue Stem County District Attorney to have Brittany's criminal complaint ready to file. We coordinated with Priya Anand to have her crew at the courthouse on the scheduled hearing date. We coordinated with Margie, Frank, Dale, and Estelle to have them present in the gallery. We drafted a fair market ground lease that any reasonable Cedar Bluff resident could sign and keep their home forever. I spent 2 evenings walking Grandpa's Blue Stem Prairie with Maddie. She pointed at a hawk circling over the ridge and asked me what its name was. I told her hawks don't usually have names, but if we picked one, we could call this one Wesley. Maddie thought about it for a while and said, "Hawks live alone, but he probably has friends he visits." I think she was right. The Tuesday before the hearing, I drove past Brittany's house in the cul-de-sac at the north end of Cedar Bluff. Her lights were on at midnight. Her shadow paced across the curtain like a caged animal. The truth was already inside her house, even if she hadn't said its name yet. The Blue Stem County District Courtroom on the morning of November 14th held more people than it had on any day since the cattle theft trial of 1987. Marisol wore a charcoal suit and pearl earrings. I wore the same boots I'd worn to my grandfather's funeral. Brittany sat at the defense table in a navy dress, hands folded too tightly, flanked by 2 attorneys from Carruthers and Boyd, whose body language said they'd already accepted what was about to happen. The gallery was packed. Cedar Bluff residents in the back rows. Frank Delaney in row 2, leather jacket on, hands folded. Margie, the pediatric nurse, 3 rows behind him. Priya Anand's NBC crew set up by the door. The Fox reporter Kyle in the corner. 2 reporters from Austin Papers. A radio host from San Antonio. The Texas Attorney General sent a young assistant AG named Renata Lopez to observe. Judge Cassandra Worth, 63 years old, 28 years on the bench, no patience for nonsense, gavelled in at 9 sharp. Marisol walked through the case in 43 minutes. She introduced the 1962 lease. She introduced the reversion clause. She introduced the certified mail receipt from 1985, showing the HOA had been formally notified of the lease terms when the property changed hands. She introduced Grandpa's notebook. She introduced the affidavits from Frank, Dale, Estelle, and Margie. She introduced the Blue Stem County Recorder's certified statement, confirming no renewal had ever been filed. She introduced the HOA's own newsletters, in which Brittany described the parcel, using language consistent with a leaseholder, not an owner. She introduced the records of HOA dues, collected over 14 years. She closed with one sentence. "Your Honor, the defendant has occupied my client's land without legal authority for 14 years, collected approximately $12 million in dues during that occupation, and destroyed a memorial gate, a well system, and 2 pecan saplings within the last 6 weeks in an attempt to intimidate the rightful owner. We seek quiet title, restitution, and injunctive relief." The Carruthers and Boyd lead attorney stood, glanced at his notes, glanced at Brittany, glanced back at his notes, and said the only honest sentence he'd spoken all month. "Your Honor, we concede the validity of the original lease and its expiration. We do not contest the quiet title action. We request the court's mercy on the question of damages." The room exhaled in one long breath. Judge Worth pulled off her glasses. "Counsel, Your client also stands accused of criminal mischief, well tampering, and filing false statements with the county. Those matters are not before this court today, but I trust you've prepared her." Brittany's face went the color of old milk. Then Renata Lopez, the assistant AG, stood from the gallery and asked permission to address the court. Granted. She announced, in a calm, clear voice, that the Texas Attorney General's office had completed its preliminary inquiry into Cedar Bluff Estate's dues collection and would be filing civil charges for unauthorized assessment of fees, with a parallel referral to the Bexar County DA for potential embezzlement related to Brittany Holloway's personal use of HOA funds, including the $75,000 spent on Carruthers and Boyd and the $18,000 used to install a private pool at the Holloway residence between 2022 and 2024. Brittany's hands started to shake. Marisol passed me a folded note under the table. The note read, "Now." I stood up and asked Judge Worth for permission to address the court. Granted. I looked at the gallery, at Frank, at Margie, at the residents who'd been deceived for years, at Priya Anand's camera, at the row of board members who'd resigned the week before, and I spoke the line I'd been rehearsing in the cab of my truck since I'd walked off that broken cedar gate. "Your Honor, I want every family in Cedar Bluff Estates to keep their home. I want their children to grow up where they've grown up. I'm not here to evict anyone. I'm here to offer every household a permanent ground lease at fair market rate, signed directly with the Whitaker estate, with full transparency, full protection, and zero involvement from anyone who lied to them. The only person leaving this community is the one who treated her neighbors like livestock." Frank Delaney clapped first. Margie clapped second. By the time the gavel came down, the entire gallery, except Brittany's loyal timeshare friend Trent, was on its feet. Sheriff's deputies escorted Brittany Holloway from the courtroom on a warrant for criminal mischief. She did not look at me. She looked at the floor. Outside, in the November sun, Priya Anand asked me one question on camera. "Mr. Whitaker, what would you tell Brittany Holloway right now?" I thought about Grandpa. I thought about the longhorn skull and the splintered wood. I thought about Maddie's hawk. "I'd tell her," I said, "she just learned how a small woman can fall a long way." 6 months later, I stood on a small wooden stage at the eastern edge of the Whitaker Ranch, looking out at 300 people who'd come to dedicate the Wesley Whitaker Blue Stem Preserve. The preserve covered 200 acres of the original ranch, the part Grandpa had loved most, the prairie that flowered into a sea of indigo and bronze every September. I donated it to the Texas Land Trust with a permanent conservation easement, ensuring no developer would ever touch it. The trust planned to use it for guided ecology tours and a summer field school for kids from Blue Stem and the surrounding counties. Right next to the preserve sat the new Wesley Whitaker Education Center, Grandpa's old cabin, expanded, restored, and reopened as a community classroom with a meeting hall, a small library, and a porch where retired ranchers played dominoes on Saturday afternoons. The cedar gate was rebuilt by hand, longhorn skull and all, using planks salvaged from the original and donated by my neighbor Frank Delaney, who turned out to be a hell of a carpenter. The new ground lease program covered every single Cedar Bluff Estates household. 231 of the 240 families signed the same week the contract was offered, at a rate so reasonable that one resident called it the cheapest peace of mind in Texas. The Whitaker estate now collected modest annual ground rent, enough to fund the preserve, the education center, a scholarship program for any Blue Stem high school senior pursuing environmental science or law, and a small monthly stipend for Maddie's college savings. The 9 families who didn't sign immediately came around within a month. By the time the dedication happened in May, every home in Cedar Bluff was legally and permanently on Whitaker land, by mutual agreement, not by force. Brittany Holloway didn't sign. She didn't have the option. The Texas Attorney General's office settled with her for restitution of $312,000 in misused HOA funds. Bexar County prosecuted the criminal mischief charges. She pled guilty and received 2 years probation, 2,000 hours of community service, and a permanent ban from serving on any homeowners association in the state of Texas. Her husband filed for divorce in March. The Holloway house went into foreclosure in April. The new family who bought it at auction is named Ramirez, and they have 3 kids and a rescue greyhound who likes to chase butterflies in my yard. I made one last decision quietly. I offered to lease Brittany's former lot at the same fair market rate as everyone else's. No public announcement, no press, just the standard contract. That's how Grandpa would have wanted it. The blue-stem hawk Maddie had named after her great-grandfather circled over the dedication ceremony for 15 minutes. Maddie pointed at it from the front row. I waved up at it like an old friend. At the podium, I read one line from Grandpa's notebook out loud, the only line that made it into the public record. "The community is yours, son. So is what you decide to do with it." I told the crowd that what I'd decided was simple. That land belongs to everyone who treats it with respect, and to nobody who tries to take it by force. Frank Delaney spoke after me. So did Margie the nurse. So did a 13-year-old girl from Blue Stem Middle School, who'd just been named the first Wesley Whitaker Scholar. We cut a ribbon. We ate barbecue. The hawk circled twice more and then climbed into the warm afternoon sun and disappeared over the ridge toward the lower creek where Grandpa had died feeding a heifer almost 8 months earlier. Maddie tugged my hand. "Dad, can we plant another pecan tree?" "How many do you want?" "All of them." We planted 3 that evening, near the rebuilt gate, in the soft red dirt that had carried Whitaker boots for 4 generations. If you've ever watched a petty volunteer try to bulldoze your life with a clipboard and a smile, I want to hear your story in the comments below. Share your HOA nightmare. Tell us where you're watching from. And if this story made you feel something, anger, hope, the slow burn of justice well earned, hit subscribe and stick around. Next week's story is even bigger. A small-town widow takes on a hospital board that thinks her late husband's pension belongs to them. You will not believe how she ended their meeting.